Hi, everyone. It's Jason Weaver, Fractional Chief Product Officer to Growth Stage Companies. I'm here with my friend Tristan, and we are just talking about subscriber growth and some of the things you do. Maybe, Tristan, give them a little bit about your background and we'll get into it.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tristan Keim. I have been in product strategy for the last 20 years. It's mainly been trying to sell and increase conversion rate optimization for different subscription products. I started out at Nextel back when Nextel was a great company, selling mobile phones and trying to understand why customers were churning. That turned into Sprint and buy online, pick up in store. And then I moved over to SiriusXM for about 7 years, where I managed customer acquisition and retention there.
Awesome. And then just for the audience, Tristan and I had a little stint working together at Lee Enterprises as consultants. Maybe give me an example of some of the things that you've stepped into in a company role and some of the things you work.
Sure. I think some of the best things have always been finding areas where customers are falling out of processes, either whether it's acquisition or retention. One of my favorite projects we worked on for a long time was trying to increase conversion rate for trials that we had coming on. So people were coming on, they were signing up for $1 for 3 months, or a free trial for 3 months, but they weren't really getting engaged in the product very heavily. So at the end of that 3 months, we saw lots of churn. We walked in and realized that the best thing to do would create a better onboarding experience for our customers, and really get them to kind of come in, play with the app for a day or two, recommend some content that they might be interested in, and really try to engage them over that first 3 days, the first week, the first month of that trial. And we found that if we could engage those folks, we would, dramatically increase their likelihood of not churning. So 30% savings in churn. And we really found that acquisition was, sort of started, or I guess retention was started at that onboarding process. So coming in and getting people engaged in your product was, one of the key learnings. It wasn't just filling the funnel and converting people to sales.
How much of this strategy when you work on is really improving the usability, or do you feel like a lot of the conversion is driven from discounting, right? Discounts and stuff like that.
So the reason a lot of this started was to get away from discounts, because most of the companies I come into, or not most of them, but a lot of them have gotten onto this path of where they're just discounting and discounting and discounting over time. And that is not sustainable. Eventually, you're sort of pricing out your customers, or teaching them that they know that they can come back and get a discount. So what you really need to do is show value within that. And a lot of that became A/B testing around what were the proper value propositions to talk to people. What did you get them engaged with within the product to make them see that value and make them understand the value, so they weren't either left out there hanging or thinking that they were, thinking the product was going to do something for them that it didn't. So setting the right expectations up front, teaching them how to use it very quickly, and making sure that value proposition was carrying all the way through.
Now, you worked for a variety of different subscription-based companies. How important is a free trial? So we don't have discount. Are you giving them a sample free trial to get them to convert? Is that a tactic that's worked?
It has worked for a lot of customers. We did some testing at one point to see if a free trial versus a dollar trial would, which one would work out better.
Yeah.
The free trial generated more people trying, but much higher churn. People paying $1 would sort of understand why they would put a credit card in, and be more likely to continue on afterwards. So maybe you got 75% more people with the free trial than the dollar trial, but at the end of the day, the dollar trial netted you more paying customers. I think because they were committed, because they didn't feel awkward about entering a credit card. There was a reason to be putting a credit card in, as opposed to asking for it at a free trial, and then sort of knowing that you would be charged as you go forward. So I think they're a good way to get people in to be able to see your service and be able to understand the value of it, especially if there's a little bit of concern. But I generally recommend the low paid trial versus a free trial in those experiences.
Interesting. I know you've worked on a lot of these different platforms and products and stuff like that. Was your responsibility also retention, or are you just focused on conversion with these companies you work with?
I have done both. So when I started initially, it was retention. As I said, I started out at Nextel and I was a churn analyst there. And that was a great job because everybody loved that product. The only reason people were churning was because of non-payment or fraud. People were not leaving voluntarily. They loved the service. They wanted to stay with it. it. And our job was to figure out how to stop fraud and how to stop non-payment. When Sprint bought the company, the dynamic changed a little bit and there was a lot more voluntary churn. So I was doing a lot of work as an analyst trying to understand the reason people were leaving. So we would review call records and online cancel logs as to why people were canceling and trying to understand the reason that they were, and then implementing programs to try and help with that. So I then came into acquisition a little bit later, running the syncing up of acquisition campaigns up in the funnel. So all the email marketing, all the paid and social media, and then making sure that when people were coming to the acquisition funnel on the site, that all that messaging matched up. We were basically trying to make sure content aligned between the marketing message that was sent to the customer with what they were seeing online when it was time to convert, and making sure that messaging matched up so that there were no surprises in the flow. Again, I guess all of this comes down to reducing friction for customers and making it easy to
Yeah.
buy, it easy to sign up. So
Yeah, and I'm curious to something, and I got to ask you this question: how much of success and on subscriptions is based on good product market fit, like they just have a good product, right? Versus the steps in going through that workflow or that sign up process and onboarding. I don't know if you can answer that question, but it seemed like we worked for a couple companies, that maybe the product wasn't all the way there, and we're trying to force feed it. I'm just curious what your perception is of that.
I would say that a good product sells itself. So you can have a terrible conversion flow if you've got a great product. Not that I would recommend having one.
Yeah.
But the product is what people buy in the end. I think the idea of conversion rate optimization through acquisition is setting up as I said, sort of the value proposition of what people are buying, making sure they understand what it is they're getting, and you're talking about the product in a way that is accurate. So with products that are still growing, I think there's always room for enhancement, but as long as you're accurate in communicating what it is the customer is getting and there are no surprises, there is a good case to have a good marketing funnel and to be optimizing that experience. You also want it to be as frictionless as possible. I don't want to be entering a ton of information if that's not necessary. I've worked at a bunch of companies that ask for all sorts of demographic information that people don't necessarily want to give right away. They also may make sort of value proposition statements that are confusing. So lots of A/B testing and understanding your customer segments and marketing specifically to those customer segments, takes you a long way. But to the beginning part of your question, a great product sells itself, so it's a lot easier to sell a great product.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. The other question I have for you is I have a lot of subscribers that are in B2B. I know you've done a lot of B2C, right? It seems like they might have similar challenges though, right? 'Cause you think of a company like Slack when you're signing up for it, or Notion, right? There's more B2B. Do they have to also take the same, approach to, conversion and subscriptions as the B2C companies? Are there differences? Are there similarities?
I think they're very similar, and at least those that I'm working for. I've got a client right now that I'm working for that does B2B sales to different venues. So they do digital out of home advertising and they sell their product to different venues across the United States. They get content which they're able to watch, and they do some advertising on this to recoup some of those costs. So they're selling B2B to both the venues that they're trying to get these players into, and to advertisers out, across the advertising network, saying, if you want to message this type of venue in these geographic areas, we have so many signage slots that we can do. I think those messages end up being very similar as they do in B2C. We're providing value. This is how we think we are able to provide it to you, and this is the return you should expect to see from doing this with us. Now, these are mostly small to medium-sized businesses, so maybe the experience of selling to them and their purchasing is very similar to B2C because it's a smaller scale purchase. But in the end, I think the messaging is always the same. Show us what the value is, make it as easy for us to buy as we can, and make it as easy to support the device as I can as I'm going through, or whatever the product is.
How involved do you get in drawing the prospect to the company? Like, I know that you're masterful at the onboarding workflow, carrying it through once they land on the site or whatever. Is part of your process understanding the external variables that drive people to that site initially?
Yes, and segmentation. So the first thing I usually do coming into a company is try to understand all their online metrics. Where is their traffic coming from? Demographically, who is coming, who is purchasing and who is not purchasing, and where they're falling out of that purchase funnel. And then understanding if that's the segment that we've really, or segments that we really want to be going after. We did a lot of work at Sirius at one point to understand who our current customers were, which was a group of people that were starting to age out, but they were the core base of customers and they drove a lot of the company's revenue. We then looked at who is the segment we needed to go after that would fill in the gap as this group of people started to leave, and what we need to sort of understand the messaging to go after that group. So we found this group of sort of influencers that wanted to understand more about music and have a more curated experience than they were having on some other platforms. And so the idea was, how do we find these influencers that are going to go out and talk to other people?
I'm going to ask another question. When you first go into an organization, how do you first get started? Right. So, what do you look for? What data points are you pulling in? Like maybe even if you want to go deeper, give an example of some company you worked with and how you got started. Like if you came into my company day one and I had this challenge, where would you start?
All right. So whenever I go into a new company, I think the first thing I want to sit down with the lead team and understand is, what is their current strategy? Who are they going after? Why do they think their product is a good fit for that group of people? And if it seems to be working, and really understand what the product does, what the value points of it are, if it's working well or if it needs help. And then I want to dig very heavily into data to understand if that plan is actually working. Is the product being sold to the people that we're going after? Where are people falling out of any sort of conversion flows? I want to understand, as I said, this onboarding experience. So how many people are using the product within the first day, within the first 3 days, within the first 7 days, and then in the first month, especially on trials? And if those people are staying after that initial trial, or if they're continuing on. And if we're getting a lot of people dropping off during that trial, what programs can I institute within that onboarding period to help them continue on and find the product useful? And then finally, I want to understand where people start to churn. And it's never when they hit the cancel button on your website. It's usually early on. So there's a lot of great AI CRMs these days that can look at when customers are calling in or they're interacting with help sections on your website. And you see, as these sort of interactions spike, a month down the road, people have gotten frustrated enough that they're deciding to cancel. So how can I intercept those people that look like they're going to cancel, or that look like they're risks for canceling, and get messaging in front of them, or figure out and solve their problems? And then finally, once they do say hit the cancel button, what kind of segmented response can I give them to help them be interested in not canceling? So can I help people downgrade into something that might be more useful for them? And then finally, even if they decide that they want to cancel, I want to make that easy for them, because I've had tons of subscription services that have been difficult to cancel, and it's made me not want to go back. There's
Yeah.
a food service I use personally that it lets me cancel whenever I want, and I'll go off it for a month and a half, and then I'll realize I like it again. So I come back on and off and use it all the time. And I think that a lot of companies get stuck in this loop of feeling that making people call in those states where it's still allowed to happen and
I
causing
hate
all this,
that. Yeah.
it makes things so difficult for the user that they never want to come back. Whereas if I just want to be a part-time user, maybe I would, if it's easy to cancel, I'll come on and come back and go. So
I just add to that. I completely understand. There's a subscription I had where you had to call in, wait for a while. They try to talk you out of canceling, et cetera. And that to me signals that they don't have a good product, right?
right.
Like
Yeah.
if you're so afraid of people canceling and leaving that you have to kind of strategize on how to keep them by any means necessary, you don't have the product, right? And that's kind of what we talked about at the beginning, product market fit versus workflow stuff, right? Well, all right. So, Tristan, to kind of wrap up here, what does an ideal client look like for you? I know that you have experience across the board from media to, different industries, and working with you personally, I know that you're good at determining how to best convert these people into paying subscribers. What would you say is the ideal customer for you, and how do people get a hold of you?
I think the ideal customer for me is, small to medium sized business that is looking to increase their subscription or retention rates. I really like working with people that are open about their data and their strategic plan. It's very hard to dig, and find problems that customers are having if they're not being open with you. And it's easier for me to provide value, for us to work away with something that works if we can be honest about what we think the company problems are.
So I'm Jason Weaver. You've been listening to Tristan, my friend, talking about subscription management, converting subscribers, and he's masterful at doing this. So reach out to Tristan, and then subscribe to my YouTube channel and on LinkedIn, and get more episodes like this. But I appreciate your time today, Tristan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. It's always great talking, and you've been a great mentor to me. So I agree. Reach out to Jason if you've got questions about your business. He's a great person to talk to and has lots of wisdom across the board when it comes to building a business online. So I
Thanks. And
appreciate
I
it.
didn't even pay him to say that at the end, everybody. So anyway, thank you. Thank you. All right.